Hey everybody, welcome once again to the Rough Cut Podcast. In today's show, we sit down with producer and director Doug Liman. Now, you probably already know that Doug directs films like Swingers, The Bourne Identity, and Mr. and Mrs. Smith, but you may not know that he also produces TV shows like The OC and Covert Affairs. Here to talk about the differences between working in film and television, as well as a few other things, is Doug Liman. Doug, thanks for taking the time to do this with us today. I've already seen firsthand just how insane your schedule is, so we really appreciate it. And I kind of wanted to start with something we talked about a little bit before we got rolling, and that is this year is the 15-year anniversary of Swingers. I think we're debating whether it was when you sold it or when it came out. And I'm sure a lot of people are aware that was how you really came onto the scene with Jon Favreau and Vince Vaughn. But I don't think a lot of people are aware of how you were set up to take advantage of that opportunity, whether it was formal training in film school or jobs you had had prior to that. What was your brief history before you came onto the scene with Swingers?
Well, it's a history of mistakes, and I've definitely come to understand that that you got to learn from your mistakes. And I mean, some people sort of just dig in and just keep making the same mistake over and over again. And so it was a history of failure, mistakes, and then learning from them and recovering. So. I had made a film before Swingers called Student Body, also called Getting In. It went through sort of a checkered life. I was hired when I was in film school to do it, and by for a film student, very fancy, prestigious producers.
This is a studio release.
Yeah. One of the producers won a bunch of Tonys. It was a big deal. It was like off to the races. And the thing when you go to film school is that most of the people going to film school don't get jobs.
Yeah, I've heard that.
I mean, these days people go to law school, they don't get jobs. But back when I was in film school, it was crazy to go to film school. People were basically extending and staying. When I was at USC Film School, there were people who had, I basically hadn't been born yet, and these people had already been at USC. They were basically staying there as long as possible, staying there as long as possible, because the moment you actually graduate, you got to start repaying your loans. So they were just dragging it out as long as possible, because they're just not the kind of school that you go to and then suddenly you get a job. And I actually miraculously got hired, and the producers had a very strong idea of exactly how the film should be made and how $1 million film should be made, and it sort of differed from how I thought it should get made, and I ultimately backed down on some things I really believed in, and then the title sequence of that film I went and did the way I actually had wanted to do the whole movie. And when film was all done, and it was a film that $1 million had been spent on the film itself and $500 had been spent on the title sequence. Because I use all the sort of crazy low budget tricks that I'd wanted to really use for the whole film. Your test film stocks from Kodak. Back then you could call up Kodak and be like, I'm thinking of shooting a movie, and can we try out some of your film stocks, and compare them to Fuji film stock, and Kodak will send you, 1,000 feet of free film. And then you just field these phone calls from a salesperson for the next year, wondering how the film's going and when they're going to be able to sell you, 100,000 feet of film. And so I shot it with basically borrowed film, and it was all shot at my parents' basement. We had no movie lights. I just used fluorescent light fixtures, and just really sort of shot in a very free way. And it's the thing I'm most proud of in the entire movie. And so I sort of learned from that experience that made me to trust my gut a little bit more and fight for what I really believe in a little bit harder. And came off of that experience with this title sequence that I was incredibly proud of. I should have done the whole movie that way, regretting that I hadn't done the film that way. And then when I read Favreau's rough draft of Swingers, I said, I'm going to go make that movie exactly the way I made the title sequence of Getting In, which is what I went and did.
Well, even though you as you put it, you sort of backed down in what you believed in on that film, clearly in that film, and especially with Swingers, where Favreau had been working that script for some time and had an opportunity to do it, but not on his terms, you must have had some skill set to really sell yourself or make these people believe in you, that you could do this. And that's not something you really learned in film school. What was it that you had that got these people to buy into you, even though you were, so young and relatively inexperienced?
Honestly, I don't know, because when I look back over my career, there were some crazy things that happened that, like convincing Jon Favreau to sell me the script for Swingers for $1, which is what I paid for it. Or, even more miraculous is convincing Universal to allow me to go make Bourne Identity when I'd only made Swingers and another low-budget movie.
Which was Go.
I look back on that, I'm like, very impressed that Stacey Snider, had the guts to make a call like that, but I'm also like, what? How did I possibly convince those people to do that? And granted, in the case of Bourne Identity, I own the rights, so if they wanted to make the movie, they didn't have a choice but to make it with me, but most studios would just be like, okay, we're not making the movie with, I'm not going to send a director who's only done a few low-budget movies to Europe with $50 million, but I somehow convinced them to do that. And there is a thing where there are some directors who consistently make bad movies and work all the time, and what I'm told is that they give good meeting. That's sort of an expression.
So there's an art to that.
And I'm definitely not known as giving good meeting, because I'm not a sales guy, but obviously there is a sales component. I'm able to convince Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie to go do Mr. and Mrs. Smith. I'm able to convince Universal to go make Bourne Identity with an untested director. I'm able to somehow, my father was a great lawyer, and maybe somewhere those genes got passed to me in a specific way where I'm good at convincing people to do things. But you're absolutely right that is not taught in film school. And for better or worse, there's two sides to being a filmmaker. There's, what happens when you're actually on the set and you have actors and a script and a camera. But to get to that place is a totally different skill set, because that's how you are with studio executives and money people and in a conference room. And you don't get to see if you're any good on the set with a camera and actors and lights and a script, unless you can do the first thing, unless you can somehow convince people. And occasionally there are filmmakers who come along, like when I was just starting USC, John Singleton was making Boys in the Hood, and it was this incredible success story where he'd been a student at USC ahead of me and had written a script, and suddenly I think Sony bought it or Columbia bought it, and they were like, we're gonna make your movie, and they just sort of like handed him a movie. And for the most part, that doesn't happen. For the most part, you're out there like a traveling sales guy.
Did you ever have a chance to talk to him about that, to John Singleton?
I've sort of met John Singleton later in life. Like I've gotten to know him over the last couple of years, and but we never actually sat down and talked about USC. And I mean, he was like, when I started USC, he was like the poster child. It was like being with it was like talking about the President of the United States or something. I mean, he had that kind of cult status, because not only did he make a big movie, but it was like hugely successful, critically and financially. I mean, it was just like, rarely does I can't even think of another example of a film student sort of hitting the jackpot the way he did. But on the other hand, I really do believe that, even though my experience coming out of USC, because I also sort of got a film out of USC that wasn't received the way his was, I also learned sort of to have a very thick skin. And you need it in this business, because there is so much rejection.
Still to this day, I mean, even after a track record of big successes, you still have to deal with people saying, that's not what we're looking for.
All the time. And it is, even one of my producers from Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who was a screenwriter who wrote Beautiful Mind, told me the story once how after Beautiful Mind won the Academy Award for Best Screenwriter, he went out with a pitch. And he actually had timed it to come right after the Academy Awards in case he won. You know, I guess he was the odds-on favorite, so he was banking on it. He won. He said, this is going to be the easiest pitch to sell in the history of filmmaking, because you've just won the Academy Award for Best Screenwriter, and now you're going out and pitching your next movie that you're going to write. And nobody bought it. And it actually made him feel better about the film business, because up until that moment, you always have in your head that like other people have it easier. That there's some private club where they're smoking cigars and screenwriters and directors are saying, hey, I want to make this movie, and the people who make movies and fund them are like, okay, go make it, and the actors that are going to star it are sitting at the next table, and it all happens so easily. And you really do have that sense that it's easier for other people. And the only reason why I don't have that is because my friend relayed this experience to me that he'd had and been like, he said if there was a private club, he would have been in it. He just won the Academy Award for Best Screenwriter. So he could definitively know there's no private club. And you know, Valerie Plame, whose life story Fair Game is based on, you know, used to tell me that, you know, when you work at the CIA, it's not at all like it is in the movies. It's sort of more work than it is excitement. And
that's probably good.
Yeah, but except that there's no magical satellites, you know, intercepting, you know, the kind of stuff.
Well, that's up for you to come up with.
The stuff we do in movies, and you know, command centers with plasma TVs that show you exactly where the villain is, or I mean, it's much more mundane, basically. Yeah. And she would tell me, as other people that her coworkers would all sort of share this with me, that they all had this idea when they started working at the CIA, that they weren't working at the real CIA. That they were working for the CIA, but somewhere there was a back room where the really cool stuff happened. And that one day somebody would come along and tap you on the shoulder and be like, you get to come and be part of the club now. And they get taken through another set of double doors. And there would be the CIA that more closely resembled the CIA that we portray in movies and TV shows.
So it feels like you're never at the top. Whatever business you're in, it always feels like there's that next level that you just can't reach. Is that sort of the idea?
Basically, there is no next level. It's not that people naturally feel that way, because I think human beings are naturally insecure. But it's sort of, the more you can understand that there is no private club, there is no next level, there is no, you know, it's not any easier for me today to make a film than it was when I made Swingers. It's just, I mean, there are certain aspects that are easier. I can get people on the phone now that I couldn't get on the phone before, but I still have to convince actors to be in the movie, writers to write it, someone to fund it. I mean, it's all the same processes. It's not like I suddenly have like a blank check.
As a filmmaker, when you're aware of something, you know, like that discussion you had with Valerie about, okay, the CIA is not what you think, and you're making a movie like Mr. and Mrs. Smith, where it is all that big, you know, flashy command center stuff. Do you ever think, well, maybe I should tone this down a bit, or no, this is fantasy. I'm going to go as big as I have to go.
Well, it depends on the tone of the movie. Mr. and Mrs. Smith was specifically of a heightened tone. Wasn't meant to be real. In fact, that was why it was so important for me to cast big movie stars like Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, to be like, it's not real. It's not part of the fun of the movie is like, it's Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie living in suburbia in the house next to you. The characters are larger than life, the actors playing them are larger than life. And that was really important for Mr. and Mrs. Smith, because they were really going to be beating each other up. And had I done Mr. and Mrs. Smith, like say I did Bourne Identity, where it felt real, it would have been unwatchable. I mean, it would have felt like Battery. It would have felt like, you know, domestic violence. It would not have felt like a big, fun popcorn movie. So there are, you know, for the tone of that particular movie, it needed to not be real. And it was, I mean, just look at the office that Angelina works in. I mean, it's gleaming blue, and it's got nothing but beautiful women working in there. I mean, it's just not.
It's a video game fantasy, yeah.
Versus Chris Cooper's office in Bourne Identity, which is, you know, in a sub-basement conference room, you know, with wires strung everywhere, and it's, you know, they've improvised a command center out of what clearly used to be just a regular, boring conference room, and, you know, because Bourne Identity is intended to feel real.
I talked to you at the Sundance Film Festival back in, I think it was '08, and then Jumper was coming out. I went through your filmography and I said, okay, we started with Swingers and then Go, and then, you know, Bourne and Mr. and Mrs. Smith and Jumper, and I was sort of asking, your films seem to be getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you really countered with, you know, maybe the budgets are getting bigger, the scope's getting bigger, but it's still a very personal experience. And I think you said something about everything being a two-shot in Mr. and Mrs. Smith, or you countered in some way saying, listen, even though it's a bigger budget, it's still all about the characters, and I'm very conscious of that while I'm making the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a visual person, and I do like action, but I love character. It's why I really love television right now, and we have, producing with my producing partner Dave Bartis, we have 3 TV series in production, and because TV is all about character, and it's complete meritocracy. You know, it's the audience watches or they don't watch. You can't spend $100 million in an ad campaign and Slurpee cups and force people to watch, you know, a TV show the way you do with a movie. TV show, they watch it and they either come back next week because they like what they saw last week, or they don't come back because they didn't like what they saw. And it's, I love that, you know, that it really is, you survive on your merits. And when we were doing the OC, we were this like poor little show on Fox, and Jerry Bruckheimer, who's like the biggest producer in the business, had a big fancy show on Fox called what was it called? Skin? Called Skin. Yeah. I mean, it was Jerry Bruckheimer, the biggest producer in the business, has a show on Fox that, you know, was the high profile thing, and nobody even paid attention to our show at Fox. I mean, the executives weren't even coming to our set. They were just like, whatever. And then the OC went on the air, and Skin went on the air, and the audiences loved the OC. And every week, more people watched than the week before. And Skin went the other way. And ultimately, you know, the OC ran for, you know, 100 episodes, and Skin did not. And it is, you know, had I had a film competing in the marketplace against a Jerry Bruckheimer film, that outcome would not have been the same. Except in the case of Swingers. But even Swingers, like, you know, as big a success story as Swingers, you know, is seen as, it did really poorly at the box office. Like, really poorly. It was...
You got my $8. I was there.
Well, thank you for that. But it was considered a failure. There was nobody patting anyone on the back while Swingers was in the theaters. Even
didn't have any buzz coming out of Sundance, or I mean, I remember the reviews being very positive.
The irony is we didn't actually go to Sundance. Everyone thinks we went to Sundance. I had designed that whole film around going to Sundance, and again, the thing about filmmakers, especially when you look back on some of the decisions you made, like how woefully unrealistic directors can be. And one of them was, you know, in July, I convinced Favreau to sell me Swingers for $1, the script. Specifically, I said so that my sales pitch to him was that, you know, if he sold it to me for $1, we'd go make the movie, and come January, it would be at Sundance. And if he didn't sell it to me, we'd be at, because we had been to Sundance a few times together, I said, we'll be at another Sundance watching other people's movies and not ours. So let's just go make it. So I guess you asked sort of about the 2 steps of making a movie. There's the, like, what you do once you actually have a camera and you're filming, and there's what you have to do to get to that day. So that, I don't necessarily give good meaning, but I have good, I can sometimes make a good argument for why a particular film should get made. But it's a crazy idea to think, like, you're gonna shoot a movie in September and show it to Sundance in October, and it'll be done, mixed, color timed, and projectable in January. And this is, you know, your audience won't even know this anymore, because back then we were shooting film.
Right, but you're still doing non-linear editing. I mean, you cut Mirioni, you cut that in Media Composer.
Still, it's just the physical finishing aspect of film versus digital there's a whole very mechanical process that film has to go through at the end with negative cutters, cutting your negative, and then doing, you know, rough answer prints and I mean, and each time you do a step, it's like taking something to the tailor and then waiting a week for it to come back. I mean, there's nothing fast about finishing in film. And, you know, your audience today watching work in, you know, digital just won't understand, because in digital you could just finish it overnight on your computer. That's not possible.
Well, how do you feel about that, man? I know that you've really embraced digital production, shooting with Red. Do you think there's anything that people are missing by not having that experience of working with film, or are you just happy to see it go based on all the problems that, you know, you had to face with it?
No, I love film, and I love, like, I'm very nostalgic about, because I really love touching film and just everything about working, especially in 35 millimeter. But it's, you know, I haven't taken a still picture with film, and I can't even remember how long it's been since I actually took a still picture, dropped the film off for 1 hour processing. And it just, for me, doesn't make sense to shoot my movies on film anymore. But I think I try to sort of maintain the discipline of film. And, you know, we were just talking about this yesterday when someone was taking a digital picture, and they were remember what it was like to take pictures with a 35 millimeter still camera, and you only had 36 pictures or 24 pictures in a roll, and you accidentally pressed the shutter button and took a picture when you didn't mean to, and you're like, shoot, I only have 3 pictures on the roll left. And you had to be so careful about each picture. Versus digital, now you just take them, and, you know, there's no discipline at all with taking digital pictures. And so I try to, with film, with my movies, try to shoot with the same discipline as though I was shooting with film stock. And film stock is 10-minute rolls, 4-minute rolls or 10-minute rolls. Or in the case of Swingers, since we were using old film stock, it was like 1 to 4-minute rolls. And we would save the 4-minute rolls for longer dialogue scenes and use the 1-minute rolls on shorter dialogue scenes. And obviously I'm proud of the results. So I usually shoot digital with memory cards versus a hard drive, so that it's still, you shoot 10 or 20 minutes and then you got to change cards. So you actually are thinking about, oh, the camera's rolling. You're not, because people with a hard drive could just let it roll, and I feel like there's not as much discipline with that style of filmmaking.
Well, aside from being a producer and director, there's also been times where you've been a cinematographer. You know, Go and Swingers and Go, you're a DP on that. What is it that makes you decide whether or not to assume that role on a project?
I do one particular look, and I do it very well. And honestly, I think I'm great at it, but I don't do other looks. So if the film wants to have that look, then I shoot it myself. And if I want a different look, then I hire somebody who I believe knows how to do that look. So that's really, the decision comes down to that.
How about in terms of editing? I know you've worked with a lot of very talented editors. You ever dabble in that yourself? I mean, I know you have a bunch of media composers in your shop.
I have a very strong opinion about editing, and I do own some media composers, and I do know how to use the Avid, and I know how to use all the features and the buttons, and I can add titles and do dissolves and split screen, and I mean, I don't just know how to edit with the Avid. I know almost all the features, and I'm pretty fast at it, but I don't know how to edit. And luckily, early on, I worked with a very young guy named Steve Marioni, who went on to win an Academy Award for editing and Traffic. And but he cut my first films, and even though, I mean, he was like, I hired him. He was a student at Santa Cruz, who responded to a message board at USC on my short film, and he had just graduated Santa Cruz, and so he edited my short film, he edited the first feature I did, he edited Swingers, he edited Go, and even for a guy who was like, you know, probably 21 when I first hired him, he was very strong and had very strong ideas. You know, almost admirable how, and I'm sure he probably looks back on it and can't believe that how naive he was to be so strong-willed. You know, and it's something great about youth that you, in a moment, even though you don't necessarily have the stuff to back it up, you just go for it. And so one of his things was, he said, because we cut Swingers on an Avid, and basically the Avid was brand new back then.
You did a lot of audio design on it too, I think.
We did everything on it. And it was brand new, and I basically was learning it as he was learning it, and could operate it basically as well as he could, because it literally was brand new. And Steve was like, look, knowing how to operate this machine is different than knowing how to edit. They're two different skill sets, and don't ever confuse the fact that you know how to make it, how you know how to physically make an edit from thinking that you know how to creatively make an edit. You hire editors to edit, and it's not, I really try to resist, and Steve was so strong-willed about this that we would, I'm a little bit messy, kind of a reputation for that, and he would get upset on Swingers because I would use the Avid, and the keyboard would end up being sticky with some candy I'd been eating, and there'd be crumbs in it, and Steve, like a lot of editors, was a lot more fastidious, and so when it came to go, he was like, if you want to touch an Avid, get your own Avid. So we actually got an extra Avid for me, because I do like looking at my footage on the Avid, and I like playing around on the Avid, but he was like, look, you can do whatever you want on your Avid. You make as many edits as you want. I will never, ever look at what you do. He said, you have to figure out how to use words to communicate to me, your edit, or what it is you want. If it helps you in your process to go edit on your own machine, that's fine. Do whatever, But don't ever ask me to come into your office and look at something you cut. You come to me and say, here's what I think I accomplished, and use words, and then I will go do it as your editor. But basically, the attitude that I follow editing is the attitude, again, that Steve imparted on me. As literally like a 21-year-old who the only experience he'd had was he cut my short film. Like, that was it. And even back then, he had this attitude. He said, I don't care what you intended to shoot. I don't care what's in the script. I don't care what you intended to shoot. I'm going to look at your footage and figure out what it is you did shoot, and I'm going to edit that. So from Steve's point of view, the script was irrelevant because didn't matter what intentions you had. At the end of the day, the footage is the footage. And the amazing thing about that attitude is if your editor edits what you shot and not what you intended to shoot, you'll look like a genius, because you will have accomplished, it won't look like you failed at accomplishing it, it'll look like you actually accomplished what you set out to do. It's sort of reverse logic, but if you figure out what it is you actually accomplished and then edit that, it'll appear like you accomplished your goal.
You say you've learned the ins and outs of operating the media composer, you know how to operate it. What Steven was telling you about, okay, you know how to run the machine, but I know how to edit. We touched on film school a few times. Is editing, the art of editing something you can teach, or is it just a sense of rhythm, pacing, style that you have to be born with?
It's hard to tell whether you can teach directing for that. I mean, there are technical aspects that you need to know, but at the end of the day, can you really teach how to be a novelist? Or is that like you either sort of have a story in you to tell or you don't? It's filmmaking, there's a lot of technical aspects to it that you just need to know that. But the artistry of filmmaking is probably the only thing you can teach somebody is to trust their instincts and how to, it's teach them to tell their own story. It's not, teach them, maybe learn how other people did it, but at the end of the day, you have to make your own movie. And you have to leave behind all your education and everything else and tell your story and tell it your way. And, part of, Swingers, violated everything I learned in film school. There were no movie lights. There was no, all the lessons of a, half century of filmmaking that went into the courses that I was taking at USC, I threw it all away. Because I had noticed, on the set of my first feature, that when they were just loading the camera, and it was just they were running 10 seconds of film, and it was just pointed to like a random corner of the stage. I could see the random corner of the stage, and I could see the crew walking around and having coffee, and I was like, well, why do I need all of that equipment and all those lights over there when I can see everything that's going on? That film stock is clearly good enough to capture, life without needing movie lights. And so, well, you know, maybe in film school they're teaching you how to light because 20 years before, 30 years before, that didn't work. You actually needed an enormous amount of light to get an image on film, but film stocks were very fast by the time I was starting my career. And so I basically abandoned everything I learned in film school. And well, probably if I was going to teach, if I was going to go back to film school and teach myself, the first thing I would be telling my students is, I don't know anything. I'm going to teach you, but you got to leave here, you know, knowing more than me and ignoring, you know, you can't possibly think that I know, you know, I can tell you how to go make your movie. Like, and it's a, so all I can basically do is try to give you the confidence and the courage to ignore everything I'm saying and just do it your own way.
So knowing that, with that experience, if you could do it all over again today, this is the big debate. Would you go to film school, or are there other avenues you'd pursue in terms of getting into the business?
Well, I happen to liked a lot of aspects of film school, so I would do it again. But, you know, there is no formula for it. But, you know, I wouldn't have met Steve Marioni if I wasn't at USC, and he hadn't, even though he went to Santa Cruz, he was checking the message board at USC. I mean, some of the relationships I made at film school, you know, maybe I wouldn't have had. So but I also dropped out of film school. I didn't make it all the way through.
That seems to be a common theme amongst people that actually, you know, did have some success in the business. There's a lot of like, okay, I learned what I thought I needed to learn, and then I had to go. I was ready to do it.
Although my cousin's a very successful filmmaker, and he actually graduated film school and went on to become incredibly successul. So again, there is no formula. I feel like people who go to law school, the problem is that my example was always law school. People go to law school, like you go to law school and you go get a job. And I got to find a different school of reference, because people who go to law school these days aren't finding jobs. But film school's just not like that. And it's, you know, Quentin Tarantino's, you know, the most brilliant filmmakers of our generation, you know, learned by working in a video store, and it's, you know, it's definitely worth trying.
Well, I know we can't keep you much longer, but I do have one more question I wanted to ask you, because you talked about loving working in television, and you do seem to be able to move so fluidly between TV and film. And I often hear about the hard line between television and film. Like, there's just these two camps. I do this, or I do that. Or if I work in TV, I can't get into film. I was just talking with a very accomplished television editor, and he's like, all my life I've been wanting to edit films, and I can't break through because I'm a TV editor. So how is it that you're able to move back and forth so easily? And is there really that line there in terms of, for what you perceive?
Well, I definitely know that the more interesting work is happening in television, you know, or it's happening as independent film. But it's not, you know, the company-funded, like, you know, studio-funded work, when it's film, is much less creative than studio-funded work for television. And so there are a ton of filmmakers who are now doing television that, you know, Martin Scorsese's doing television. I mean, you would never, you know, growing up, if you asked me, is Martin Scorsese ever going to do a TV show? I'd be like, no, he's an auteur, he's a filmmaker. Why, you know, and that's just the world we live in today, that, you know, he clearly feels like, you know, I don't want to speak for another filmmaker, but he clearly made the decision that he could be more creative and accomplish something on television that he couldn't do in film, or that TV was a better medium for that. And certainly I found that, you know, as I discuss, you know, because my taste, I'm interested in some things that are very commercial, like the Bourne franchise and Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and I'm also interested in stories like Fair Game. And, you know, when I sit down and talk with my producing partner, Dave Bardis, sometimes we'll talk about an idea, and Dave will go, that's too creative, it's too original for film. We're never going to get a studio to do this. Let's talk about it for television, because they'll take more chances in television. And we've consistently found that. So there are a lot of filmmakers working in television now. I'm sort of lucky that I have a big head start, because I've been doing it for almost 10 years now in television. I have a great partner. In terms of the crew going back and forth, there is a bias. You know, if you're a film director and, you know, the editor only has TV credits. There is, you know, it's crazy, even though you know that TV is where the more interesting work is happening, we still, you know, there's some patina around a film editor and people who work in film that unfortunately TV, you know, doesn't quite have. Although I imagine, you know, a TV editor who's working on Mad Men or on an HBO show would, unless you're telling me it's a Mad Men editor.
This guy who's been on Mad Men, Lost. One of the other things he had said is that, you know, someone asked him if he had to start over again today, how would he do it? And he literally said, I'd attach myself to somebody, I'd try and get a job with a Doug Liman or a J.J. Abrams, somebody that has a lot of different irons in the fire at all times in television and in film, and does some franchise work, just because, you know, you show off what you can do in one realm, they're more likely to bring you around and give you different kinds of jobs.
That's definitely true. I mean, that's the thing I love about television is we meet amazing writers and actors, and we have this whole pool of people that I can now draw from for my films, or draw from for other TV shows. You'll start to see, I mean, Peter Gallagher, who did the OC with us, is in Covert Affairs, and you know, TV allows you to develop these relationships, and also you actually, you come up with an idea, you write it, you shoot it, and it's on the air like a week later, and it's on the air with, like, you know, 6-7 million people watching easily. You know, 6 or 7 million people go see a film in 1 week. You're the number one, you know, you're the number one film that week. Your big summer box office success. You can get 7 million people to go watch your film in 1 weekend. And in TV, that happens every week. Obviously, some shows happen with even bigger numbers, and I love that it's, you know, it's something that goes from being theoretical to how quickly you go from sitting and talking about ideas in a room to suddenly presenting it to millions of people as a finished product.
Well, Doug, I know we need to let you get back to doing your real job, but I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. I had a blast when we talked at Sundance, and I had a great time again today, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Well, there you have it. That's our show for today. Now, we want to give a big thank you to Doug for sitting down and taking the time to talk with us about his career in the film and TV business. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe to The Rough Cut on iTunes. And while you're there, leave us some feedback, make some comments. Let us know what you'd like to see in the future. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again real soon.